Now I praise you because you remember me in everything and hold firmly to the traditions just as I delivered them to you. But I want you to understand that Christ is the head of every man, and the man is the head of a woman, and God is the head of Christ. Every man who has something on his head while praying or prophesying disgraces his head, but every woman who has her head uncovered while praying or prophesying disgraces her head, for she is one and the same as the woman whose head is shaved. For if a woman does not cover her head, let her also have her hair cut off. But if it is disgraceful for a woman to have her hair cut off or her head shaved, let her cover her head. For a man ought not to have his head covered, since he is the image and glory of God, but the woman is the glory of man. For man does not originate from woman, but woman from man. For indeed, man was not created for the woman's sake, but woman for the man's sake. Therefore, the woman ought to have a symbol of authority on her head because of the angels. However, in the Lord, neither is woman independent of man, nor is man independent of woman. For as the woman originates from the man, so also the man has his birth through the woman, and all things originate from God. Judge for yourselves, is it proper for a woman to pray to God with her head uncovered? Does not even nature itself teach you that if a man has long hair, it is a dishonor to him? But if a woman has long hair, it is a glory to her, for her hair is given to her for a covering. But if one is inclined to be contentious, we have no other practice, nor have the churches of God. Now listen to the next verse. But in giving this instruction, I do not praise you, because you come together not for the better, but for the worse. You come together. What's Paul talking about here in these 17 verses? He's talking about obviously he's talking about how men and women pray or prophesy or speak prophetically in the church, whether their head is covered or not covered. And he goes so far as to say, if people are going to be contentious about it, we don't even have a custom. But what's the context here? That's what I'm getting at. What's the context? The context is when the people come together as the church. And this is just the beginning of Paul's description and instruction as to what happens when the believers come together as a church. And not only here in Corinth, but Paul refers to all the churches. So this is the beginning. And Paul goes on to write in verse 18, for in the first place, when you come together as a church, I hear that divisions exist among you, and in part I believe it. For there must also be factions among you, so that those who are approved may become evident among you. Therefore, when you meet together, again, he's talking about coming together. Is it not to eat the Lord's Supper? So let me ask, when believers came together in the apostolic church, did they not eat the Lord's Supper? As part of their meeting and fellowship together? And he goes on to write, now remember, we already read from Acts 11:28, we read from Ephesians, and we read from Colossians. And the question is, what was the context of what Paul was laying out as instructions? So keep that in mind while we go through this. So Paul says in verse in 21, for in your eating, each one takes his own supper first, and one is hungry and the other is drunk. What? Do you not have houses in which to eat and drink? Or do you despise the church of God and shame those who have nothing? What shall I say to you? Shall I praise you in this? I will not praise you. For I received from the Lord that which I also delivered to you, that the Lord Jesus, in the night in which he was betrayed, took bread. When he had given thanks, he broke it and said, "This is my body, which is for you. Do this in remembrance of me." In the same way, he took the cup also after supper, saying, "This cup is the new covenant in my blood. Do this as often as you drink it in remembrance of me. For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes." What were the Christians, what were the believers doing when they came together? That's the announcement truck, if you hear that in the background. What were the believers doing? They were commemorating the Lord's death. Now, I'm going to show that for these people who essentially were the equivalent of modern day charismatics, as far as the charismatic experience goes, these people, this was not just about going through motions. See, I think nobody will say it, but I'll say it. I think people feel that if every service, which probably was once a week, believers together partook of the Lord's Supper, I think that I don't think people are going to say it, but I'll say it. I think people will worry that it can become wearisome. Now, of course, you would never get wearisome of eating yourself every day. You know, you eat and you don't feel weary. Oh, I'm going to eat today. I'm not going to feel weary to eat. You would never get tired of drinking. Probably you're going to drink something today. I'm going to drink something today. Not wine, but I'm going to quench my thirst. Yet, once a week, the Lord's Supper is too much. Once a week. You can eat and drink every day for your own stomach, but not for the Lord, not once a week. Now, if we weren't charismatics, and I'm assuming maybe you're charismatic, it could, look more like motions, going through motions. But in this case, I think there's more depth to that in the relation between the Lord's Supper and spiritual gifts. And I think we're going to see that here. So Paul, he says, "For as often as you eat this bread and drink the cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Therefore, whoever eats the bread or drinks the cup of the Lord in an unworthy manner shall be guilty of the body and the blood of the Lord. But a man must examine himself, and so doing he is to eat of the bread and drink of the cup. For he who eats and drinks judgment to himself if he does not judge the body rightly. For this reason, many among you are sick, and are weak and sick, and a number sleep. But if we judged ourselves rightly, we would not be judged. But when we are judged, we are disciplined by the Lord, so that we will not be condemned along with the world. So then, my brothers, when you come together, when when you come together, wait for one another. If anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, so that you will not come together for judgment. See, a lot of people say, church is the answer. You got to go to church. You have to think about this. Go to church for what? These people went to church, and people ended up dead. Go to church for what? Let me tell you a secret. It was about going to church for God. And it was about going to church for the betterment of the other person. And when these people got into a me mentality, what happened? Give me the wine. I want to get drunk. Give me the bread. I'm hungry. I want to fill my stomach. That's not for God. That's not for the other person. So Paul writes, if anyone is hungry, let him eat at home, so that you will not come together for judgment. And he also writes, so then, my brethren, when you come together, wait for one another. Now, it's funny. I think Protestants